You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Welcome back to the Cabral Concept. I'm Stephen Cabral, and today on this Friday review, we're going to spend our attention looking at one specific topic, and that's on longevity and anti-aging. So it doesn't matter whether you're in your 20s or you're in your 80s, we should all really be focused on this topic. You know why? The reason is that you can't wait until you're 80 years old to start thinking about what are all those things I can do to get an extra decade of my life. Like literally, it can be that powerful. What I want you to focus on are these specific topics from a book that's called Blue Zones. So Blue Zones, The Blue Zones was written many years ago. It was written by Dan Buettner, and essentially like a lot of other books on this topic, he went around or really collected a lot of research on some of the oldest living people on Earth. And one of the things is, this is kind of a follow-up from Weston Price, who looked at maybe what are some of the healthiest civilizations, what were they doing? And Dan's actually looking at, well, all of these people have something to tell us. And the interesting thing, just like Weston Price's research, is that no one was eating the same exact diet. And that's what I try to talk about over and over and over again. And the reason is that the focus should be on clean, whole foods that are minimally processed. And very, very specifically, I think this is so important because not a lot of people are talking about it. You don't have to necessarily be vegan or vegetarian if that's not your choice. But the amount of meat eaten by the oldest living population is very small. So I'm going to get specific on the paleo diet that I believe is actually an actual real paleo diet. Not that's what's being preached today, because the research doesn't back that up as well, especially longevity-based research. But specifically, one, it just doesn't make sense to eat a lot of meat. One, for biodynamic reasons, another for just agricultural treatment of animals. But now really, let's just go beyond all of that. Let's just talk about our own health. Consuming that much meat leads to other byproducts and toxins inside of the body. Now, I'm not saying not to eat meat right now. That's a personal choice that you can make, and you can decide on what works best for you. But what I'm saying is, just based on our longevity studies, we're looking at all of these people pretty much did consume some type of fish, eggs, meat, or animal-based protein in some way. But it was really, when you look at it, less than somewhere around, let's say, 10 to 15% of the diet maximum. So what would that look like? Well, that would look like literally a handful of meat or fish or eggs a day. And I think that just makes sense. I'm not going to make this topic all about eating meat and all those specific things, but diet is our first starting point. So if you're not eating all of this meat, what are you eating? Well, if you look at these oldest living populations, and I'm not going to go through every specific one in the book, I'm going to give you an overall consensus so that you don't have to read all 300 pages yourself, is that the diets actually contained legumes, which would just be like beans. They contained whole grains. Yes, they did actually contain whole grains, which would be rice or potatoes or something like that. And again, potatoes could be considered a root vegetable, depending on how you want to look at it. Some contain quinoa. When you look also at the diet, it contained lots of vegetables and really low glycemic fruits. So that's at least our starting point, right? Then we can gauge it. How many carbohydrates do you need? And that could include, again, should all your carbohydrates come really just from vegetables and some fruit? Or if you need more carbohydrates, could it contain some root vegetables like potatoes or rice or quinoa or something to that nature like millet or amaranth or some type of ancient grain? Again, not a lot of gluten-based grains, not a lot of heavily processed-based grains, but looking at that specifically. All right, so diet is obviously extremely important, trying to get low processed foods, whole foods as much as possible. The next one would be social connections. So we're basically looking at 9 pillars right now. So 9 pillars of longevity from these oldest living people. And again, we don't have to take them all specific to us, but we at least have to look at what do all of these people have in common. So social connections, but why? Why social connections? Well, social connections meant a source of belonging. So you felt like you were part of something greater and that you had people that you could rely on, that you could look to in times of need. I believe that is extremely important as well. All right? Support, that social connections. Rest. So again, these oldest living people were not trying to burn the candle at both ends like myself and many people do as well. We need to cut back a little bit. We need to rest a little bit more. We need to be a little bit easier during our days and certainly try to get to bed somewhere between 10 and 6, 10 p.m. at night, give or take an hour, and wake up around 6, again, give or take that hour. All right, our next one would be herbal teas. So many of the people in these ancient, now these next two are, you can do them or not. I certainly don't believe that they're deal breakers, these next two. So the herbal teas would be a Tulsi tea, like in India. That's one of their longevity-based teas, good for regulation of many different processes inside the body. Ginger tea, fantastic for digestion, one that I've always, really been getting into because of its many, many benefits, not only on digestion, but also the immune system, cleaning the kidneys, many other things like that as well. So herbal, but not necessarily black teas or caffeinated teas or processed teas. An organic tea, whether it's loose leaf or ground, that could potentially bring some benefits. Now, you can also look at tea as herbs as well, because teas are an herb. So it might even be an ashwagandha, like a product like that, or a triphala, like an Ayurveda, which is meant for a mild laxative essentially, and also good for detoxification and building that good gut flora. So again, I look at that as almost like a supplement, okay? The next one, most controversial for me, and that's why when I read a book like The Blue Zones, I agree with about 20, well, let's say about 90% of it. And 80, 90%. Yeah, absolutely. And 20% I probably disagree with. And the reason is it's a generalization. So it's not like I ever disagree with it. I just say, I don't want to make these blanket statements like this next one that wine consumption leads to longevity, because it doesn't in a lot of people. And I can see that from the data, and I can look at it from genetics. So when I do genetic testing, I can clearly see that about 14% of the population, when they increase wine consumption, I would assume by looking at the data that wine decreases longevity. And the reason it does that is because it can increase different types of cholesterol-based processes in the body. It could potentially lead to neurotoxins. It could potentially lead to difficulty with phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification. It could potentially lead to cancer. So a lot of those things that obviously we don't want. And I don't believe you need wine to be healthy. Now, why would some of the oldest living people say, oh, well, these people drink wine? Well, the reason is too, wine now, we're not talking about a bottle of wine a night. We're talking about like they did in ancient times as well. You had a glass of wine maybe a few times a week with friends at those social gatherings. So was it the wine that actually increased longevity, or by drinking wine with friends, was it that actual just enjoyment, the endorphins you got from hanging out with friends and enjoying the atmosphere that you were in? That's really what I'm looking at. Now, of course, there are some benefits to red wine specifically, and they do show that looking at the specific allele or ApoE blood type, that many people do, about 50% of the population. So again, it's only 50%, but 50% of the population, about 1 out of 2 people, get benefits in their LDL profile as well as their HDL by consuming 1 glass, potentially, depending on the size of the individual, 2 glasses of wine per day. Again, not needed for health by any means, in my opinion. Again, it's one more thing that your liver has to detoxify, but can be part of an anti-aging program. The last 2 are religion. So this could also just be spirituality. So there are many people out there who go to a specific church or temple or something like that every weekend. And there's absolutely, that's fantastic. So you do whatever works for you to give you that sense of community, of sense of belonging, of whatever it is that you look to religion to provide. And again, that's so many different things for so many different people. And it can be an absolutely fantastic thing as long as you look at it as a thing that enhances your life and not one that makes you feel bad about yourself or that you've you're not living up to certain expectations, which I don't believe is good for any one of us. I think we're all doing the best that we absolutely can with all the faculties and all the different things that we've been given in life. And we really don't have to be so hard on ourselves, which in my opinion does not lead to longevity. So religion or spirituality, just the sense of knowing that you're part of something greater, of potentially another life after this one, however you choose to look at it, it gives us hope and it gives us, really those positive feelings. And I believe that's what religion did for a lot of the oldest living people. Now, the last one, in my opinion, it goes along with the first one, and that is low stress. So the longest living people were able to somehow decrease their stress levels. Now, that meant whatever the stress was in their life, because believe me, everyone, no matter who you are, where you live, experiences stress. It is our response to stress that becomes the real issue, right? Because two people could witness the same exact event. One person becomes extremely anxious, overwhelmed, stressed out, and one person understands that the event was not a good one. They wish that it did not happen, but they're able to absorb what happened and then move on. And so it is that ability, which is obviously a greater challenge for everyone because we all interpret things differently in our own lives, that allows us to decrease that stress response. And that stress response, really, that is the starting point for entropy or aging, and it's a starting point for all disease. It weakens digestion. It increases cortisol levels. It increases inflammation. All these negative things that eventually lead to disease, which eventually lead to our death. So what we want to do is we do not want to speed that process up, right? We want to hopefully spend as much time as we can with our loved ones, but also in good health, right? Nobody wants to be decrepit and sick for the last 20, 30 years of our life, which is really what we're doing right now. Yes, we're keeping people alive longer. Okay, fantastic. Kudos to us for keeping people medicated and alive longer. Okay, well, that could be good for some people. But I personally do not want to suffer in my 60s, 70s, and 80s with decrepit joints, barely able to move, no energy, and highly medicated so that I really can't enjoy life. That's just not what I want. That's not how I believe that people should age with dignity. So if you're like me and you're looking just for something more and understand that there are different phases of the aging process, but what can we do to slow that and really enjoy a high quality of life? So the Blue Zones really talks about these specific things. It's not the only book on the topic, but I do enjoy really how it goes into these specific things. One thing that isn't part of those 9 pillars, but is talked about, and of course I would be remiss if I did not speak about it, is exercise. Now, the oldest living people may not have had a specific exercise per se, but they were highly active, which meant that they did some manual labor, they were farmers, many of them went for hikes or they took long walks. And so that's something to look at as well, is you do need to keep your body active because you need to keep it supple and strong and flexible. So never forget that part of your exercise and anti-aging program should always include something that isn't just going to keep your mind sharp, not just going to keep the inside sharp, but you have to keep the machine, which is your body, again, healthy, supple, and able to be moving and carry you through 80 years, 90 years, 100 plus years of life. You cannot let that part of it go. So do not do high repetition exercises that are going to break down your body, but instead think about it. I need to use this machine, my body, as a vessel to carry me through life. Is this exercise helping me or hurting me? I hope all of these different examples did help you today. Really, I just love reviewing books like this. It's something I read a while back, but love going back through it. Love talking about it as well. I get to relearn it every time I talk about these specific things. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for allowing me to express these things and review these specific books with you. I'll be back real soon on another Friday review.
Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.